Good morning and welcome to the webcast. I'm Shoeb Javed, Chief Technology Officer for Worksoft. And co-presenting with me today is David Pereles from Accenture. So as far as the agenda goes, we'll start with David covering HR trends that he sees in the new normal as he speaks with customers and does SuccessFactors implementations for Accenture. I will then discuss automation specifically, why you should think about automating your HR-based processes, as well as a cloud-based solution to make that automation straightforward. We'll also do a short demo of the solution, and then we'll wrap up by going through some real-world case studies of customers that have actually done automation for SuccessFactors and what they went through and what they have achieved. Okay, with that, I want to turn over to David Pereles. David, take it over.
Great, Shoeb, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be able to talk about what I consider an extremely important topic of automation and how it can help improve implementations, both during the implementation, past the implementation, how it can continue to change the way that we interact with the solutions that we have. As Shoeb said, my name is David Pereles. I am a managing director at Accenture, and I lead our SuccessFactors practice, which includes workforce software, Qualtrics employee experience, and Concur. And as we look at the world today, it has obviously changed rapidly. And Shoeb, if you go to the next slide, we're looking at a very different way of working. The way that we are doing work today is something that I don't think I or anyone else could have foreseen coming 6 months ago. I haven't left to get on an airplane since the day the NBA was canceled. I have that ingrained in my head just because of how big of a sports fan I am. And what we have done to adapt, is pretty phenomenal. The idea that companies have new tools, they can go and be flexible and digital and do things in ways that they haven't imagined. And part of that is automation. And if you look at the way that we're attracting talent, the way that you need to operate, it is rapidly evolved. I'll give you a couple of examples, of companies and even personal experiences that are just vastly different now. So personally, school starts for my kids on Monday. It will be virtual again. And I'll say my school district in St. Louis, they've had 5 months to look at it. How do we go and do this? And in those 5 months, I know that the curriculum and the way that they're going to interact with the students is going to be about 100 times better than what it was when we first started the pandemic. From a business side, one of my favorite companies, Peloton. If you look at what they did, their studios were shut down for a number of weeks. And in that short period of time, 2 weeks to be precise, they went from in-person recordings in their studio to what they refer to as live from home. Not without some bumps, but they worked through it, but they were able to adapt and change their business model. And if we, the third one I'll give, and this is really to any of the stores that we are all used to going to, shopping at, getting food from, or eating out at, they've all adopted to curbside. This was a forced, kind of shift, but it was something that they've all become used to and known. And in some ways, if you think about it, it will be the new normal of what we're always going to expect, And having to push and look at what things differently is what we're going to have to continue to do. So if we continue on, Shoeb, I think, as we talk Worksoft, but if we think of just automation in general, and what we're predicting from an Accenture, view is that 70% of transactions today, from an HR perspective, are going to be automated in the next 3 to 5 years. The way that we think and the way that we interact and do work is going to be changed of what we do, so we can focus and look at our attention differently. Worksoft is going to help us unlock the potential to be able to do some of that. How do we go think and look at it differently? And there will be a couple of case studies, later on, that you'll see that clients have started to challenge themselves and think about it. So as you hear, us talk and hear about the use cases and hear about how Worksoft can be used, I encourage you to think about, what are use cases that you can do? And in some ways, I'd say, hey, type it in the chat box, and we'll see if we can get to it as we talk. But I'll be curious to see what ideas come to your mind to make work different for you. From just a workforce perspective, 43% of the U.S. workforce, are freelancers, which is a huge number of the way that people are working and the way that people want to be flexible in their schedules, and how do you do that, and how do you provide the right opportunities. And from an expectation perspective, employees are 4 times more likely to trust, right, the companies that they're working for if they have the right tools. I mean, that is a huge number, and that is also a driver of why employees leave. They don't have the right tools that they feel to be successful. How do you make sure that you're providing everything, to them to be able to do it, right? Ease of use, simple, are key things to think about. And over half of the folks that responded to the survey, said that the pandemic has caused them to engage in some level of upskilling. How do you take your skills and continue to evolve? How do you make sure that you're staying on top of what's coming? How do you use tools effectively? And what you'll see, shortly is Worksoft allows you to do that in a way that you don't need to have those deep technical skills. How can I go make myself, understand how to use automation and go forward with it? And with that, Shoeb, I'll turn it to you, because there's some exciting, items that you've got to share and talk about of how Worksoft will be able to help.
Thanks, David. So I wanted to start with, a simple question, right? Why would you consider automating your cloud application-based HR processes, right? So one thing to consider, right, is, there's a lot of different cloud applications that you use, right? So your single HR process could traverse anywhere from half a dozen to perhaps several dozen applications. And each of those applications are changing constantly, and they're also changing independently. And so when a change occurs in any of the underlying applications that support your HR processes, how do you ensure that those processes work correctly? How do you ensure that there are no knock-on effects because you have integrations with your payroll systems, or you have integrations with some other ERP systems that might not be in the cloud? And how do you react fast enough when those changes come to you, especially if you also have to add compliance requirements on top, right? So if you look at, typically a company has maybe 100, 125 SaaS applications. If you look at 3 upgrades on average a year, you're now looking at, close to 370 upgrades, and that doesn't include your custom apps. So being able to deal with that degree of change and be able to keep up, you can't do it manually, right? So you have to consider automation, you have to consider automated testing, you have to consider robotic process automation to make your life easier and just be able to keep up, okay? So I'm going to talk about, how cloud-based automation can help you with that. But before I do, I just wanted to take one slide, a couple of minutes to introduce Worksoft. So Worksoft is an intelligent automation software company, and our connective automation platform provides automation for the entire life cycle of your HR or packaged application-based business processes. That includes, automated process discovery, test automation, robotic process automation, including managed services from our partners, Accenture. And the idea here is, right, we want to help you reduce technology risk. We want you to accelerate your projects, get them done 30 to 40% faster. And we want to improve efficiencies, right? So automation can save you hundreds of thousands of hours of manual labor, and things that you have to do every week, every day, every month. Those things can be automated in a quite straightforward manner. We serve customers throughout the world, right? And we have some very large as well as medium-sized companies, and we cover all the different verticals, right? So telecom, utilities, manufacturing. The solution is agnostic to industry verticals, if you will. So let's talk about business process automation, right? Let's talk about what do we mean when we say automating the life cycle of a business process. So the first part of that is automated process discovery. And what that does is it allows you to understand how your processes work in the real world, right? So before you can automate anything, you need to know what you do, right? What do your end users do every day? How do you create new employees in your system? How do you do hiring? How do you manage compliance? So we have software that's able to automate that, right? To automate process discovery. So your end users simply do what they normally do for their jobs, and our capture software captures everything that they do, and then we use that information to create automation and documentation of your processes for you, right? So that's step one, understanding your core processes. Step two then is once you know the processes, you can make sure that they're working right? So that's test automation. So as you're doing a SuccessFactors implementation, or you're doing post-implementation upgrades, or you're doing integrations or customizations, the software can make sure that your end-to-end business processes are not broken across all of the different applications that process happens to use, okay? So now you know that the processes work correctly. You can now do that same automation in production. Right? So you can say, okay, well, I understand that there's a number of manual activities I have to do on a routine basis, right? Like employee onboarding or managing compliance tasks or other HR related activity, moving data around from one system to another. Those tasks can then be automated in production. So process understanding leads to making sure those processes work correctly through automated testing. And then that leads into production automation or RPA. And then the more you automate, the more insights that you get into your processes, right? You figure out where the bottlenecks are, you figure out what things are still manual and cannot be automated. And then that feeds back into your process discovery so that you can optimize your processes and then get more efficient as you go along, right? So that there's a feedback loop, and all three of those pieces are connected to each other to deliver the right results and outcomes for you. Okay, so let's talk about cloud, right? So we've been in the automation business now for more than 15 years. And when we built our cloud automation offering, we really wanted to rethink everything and wanted to offer a truly next generation solution that was very straightforward to use for end customers, right? So the first part of that is based on a very simple premise, right? You know your business processes and we know automation. So how do we combine that together, right, to deliver you the best outcome? So you tell us, about your processes, and we take it from there. We build out the whole end-to-end automation, and then you get to use it, right? Run it whenever you want, on demand, on a schedule, as part of more complex event-based triggers, whatever you want to do. So that's the first part. And we don't want you to have complex software installs and IT infrastructure maintenance and management, right? None of that headache, right? Simply download our process capture client, and within minutes, you're ready to go, right? So your end users can now start capturing their processes, and we can take it from there, okay? We also, because we have a partnership with Accenture, we have an understanding of typical HR-based processes in general and SuccessFactors in particular. So we have pre-built automation components that we can bring to the table, which means that you don't have to build these automation pieces from scratch. We have them. What we do is we take things that might be different in your environment, and then we combine that together with our existing content, and then we give you end-to-end automation that is specific to you and works in your environment. So we give you the customizations that you need, but we also give you things that exist from before we start, so that you don't have to build everything from scratch each time. And then we have maintained that automation for you, right? So which is where the managed service part comes in. So a lot of the difficulties people have, right, is how do I create the automation? How long does it take? Who will do it? Who will manage it? How will that work? And then if I change applications or I change processes, how do I maintain that automation? So all of that is taken care of for you, right? All you have to do is give us your process information. We'll take care of the maintenance of the automation. We'll make sure it works when applications change. We'll make sure it works when your business processes change, right? So this is the no hassle automation. Just let your end users do the work they do. Processes are captured in the background, send it over to us, take care of the rest of it, and then you go drive, right? You use the automation whenever you need for whatever you want to do, okay? All right, so with that, I'll show you a demo that would illustrate all the things I'm talking about, okay? So let's look at the process of capturing your business processes, okay? So if you look here, right, on the left, you have your typical SuccessFactors, application where we are entering in a new employee. And to the right, you have the capture application. So as your end user is walking through creating a new employee, they're going through different screens, they're entering information in different fields, and our software on the right is capturing all those steps. And it doesn't slow you down, right? You notice that there's no difference in how you do things while you're capturing versus while you're not capturing. All of the information gets captured in steps with screenshots of every step so that nothing is missed. And there's no training required, right? So that your end users don't have to be trained to do anything special. They just have to turn on the software, they do what they normally do. And then when they're done, we've got everything required to create the automation, okay? So they didn't have to tell us what they do, they didn't have to write a document, none of that. Okay, so here we are finished with that particular capture, and then we simply stop the capture, and then we can do more things here, right? So if you notice here, right on the right, you can scroll through all the steps that you have captured. You can delete steps that you don't want automated. You can even mask data, right? So if you think that there's sensitive data, you can remove that. You can also remove sensitive screenshots if you don't want that to be captured or uploaded. You can add comments, you can add additional screenshots. So anything that you want to do to tell us about what you're doing is captured automatically in that application, and it gives you flexibility to manage, privacy and data related privacy issues. Okay, so once we are done with that particular capture for that particular user, we can now upload that into our system, and I'll show you what that looks like on the other side, and then how that gets converted into automation. Okay, so here we're going ahead and doing that. We're logging into the system and saying, here's how I create a new employee. And we're done. Okay, so once we get through that, we are now into the analysis part, right? So presumably you have multiple users that have captured different elements of your HR processes. Here we can combine them together, we can review them, and then we can generate the process documentation and automation, okay? So in a minute, I'll show you captures from multiple end users for the same process, and then we can see what the variations look like, and then we can use them to combine things together, right? So here we can see 3 different variations of a simple process, and then we can show you, multiple variations with the steps included for each of those processes. And we can review that and then generate the document. So here you see the document, right? The system automatically created a document for your process. It had screenshots, it has steps, it has narratives. So everything that end user did is now captured in this nice document that you can use for not just automation, but you can also use that for training or for other purposes. And in addition to this document, we are also automatically generating the automation, right? So everything that your end users did can now be replayed back as automation. Okay, so at this point, you're done, right? That's your input, right? You actually just walk through your process that you normally do as your day job. We captured all the steps, we gave you this documentation, we generated the automation, and we have it now, okay? So what happens then, right? So what happens then is we get that input transferred into our automation studio, right? So this is our experts taking all the steps that you captured. We bring it in over here, and here we add in business rules, we add in data, we add in other pre-built components. We then combine it all together, and we are able to run it, right? So now we are able to run the process that your end users did. And this is now the system running it, right? So the system is going to execute all those steps without the need for having people do it, okay? So here we are running that process, and you can see that it brings up the system automatically logs on and does everything that that end user did. So I don't really have to show you how that works, right? Because it's just automation, it runs through everything together, and you're done with it. And then once we know that all the components work together and the whole end-to-end process works together and we have tested it, now it's ready for you to use, okay? So now that it's ready, you can then deploy it in a more sophisticated way, okay? So I'll show you how that's done. So here we have the third component, right? So this is now we have built automation, you want to use it, right? So you log on to Execution Manager, which is our management solution to run the automation. You then pick up, some set of processes that you want to go execute. In this case, we are going to execute 2 processes, right? One is a new hire for the US, and one is a new hire for Canada. And we're going to run them in parallel, right? So they run faster. And we're going to distribute them across a couple of different machines and just click on Run Now. So we chose Run Now because we want to run them now. But of course, you can schedule it or you can run it based on events that are coming in. So it's very flexible on when and how you want to run this. So this is how you drive, right? So the automation is available. You pick it over here, and then you go choose machines that are set up in the cloud, and then you go run them, right? So when you run the automation, you can even look at the machine's screen that's running that process, and you can see what it's doing, right? So it gives you a little spy window here to show you what's going on. And then you can, once it's done, we generate reports, right? And we generate results. So you know that it worked or didn't work. And if it didn't work, we can send you an email saying, hey, the process did not work, something went wrong. If it worked well, we can tell you what process was run, when, how well it worked, and what it did. And then we can also have reports for your auditors or compliance people that said, yeah, we tested this, it worked properly, and it conformed to our requirements for compliance or any other needs that we have, okay? All right, so to recap, right? I showed you how your end users can simply do their day jobs and the processes are captured. We then look at the processes that are captured by multiple end users, combine them together, generate nice looking documents, and we can generate the automation for you. Our experts then finish the automation, they combine it with our pre-built pieces, they make sure it runs well, and then you get to drive it, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's get back now to the presentation. Right. So I wanted to talk to you about a customer that we worked with, a very large customer that implemented automation quite successfully. So that's Lufthansa, right? Lufthansa is a global company. So when you have, over 140,000 employees distributed across dozens of countries, and you have, those are your, full-time employees, right? You also then have contractors, have all kinds of other people that do work for you. You have the pilots, unions, right? So it's a pretty complex environment. And their challenge was, twofold, right? How do we roll out and do the implementation fast, right? So every time you roll out a new region or a new set of employees or a new class of employees, you want to make sure that everything works right. And what you want to do is build automation one time and then reuse that automation across the different regions that you roll out to, and then the different classes of employees and the different aspects of managing, different HR functions across different departments and then different divisions across the globe. And so when you do the rollouts and you do the regional deployments, at that time, you can then modify the automation to make sure that any regional variations or regional differences are taken into account. And then once you do that, you now have a library of automation that's common across your company for a certain number of processes, and then has regional variations across the different regions in the different countries for regional processes. And then each region can independently execute that automation based on their needs, as things change or as further functionality gets rolled out, or if they have integrations into different applications, for time entry or for payroll or whatever, they can manage and run that independently of the centralized library, right? So there's this model of distributed automation that can then be deployed across the world. And therefore you get that every time you do more automation, everybody benefits from it, right? So whenever you update the centralized processes, the regions just inherit them. And so the things go faster and faster, right? So every rollout becomes faster. And you save a huge amount of time when you're doing these implementations. But then you also save a huge amount of time every time any of the underlying applications gets upgraded, right? So for example, if your payroll application got upgraded or your ERP application got upgraded, you simply just run all the processes just to make sure that everything worked correctly. And then if you have data entry tasks or employee onboarding tasks or tasks that you have to perform on a fairly regular basis, you can then run the RPA, the robotic process automation processes in production, and get value, right? So we think, again, in this context of automation as applying across the board for that full process lifecycle, right? From the time you're trying to figure out what you want to do, to making sure that it works right, to then taking parts of it and automating it on a continuous basis in production, and then using whatever automation you have built, not just for the initial automation, but also using it as upgrades, changes come in, both changes that are driven by your application vendors, as well as changes that are driven by your business functional requirements or your process changes. So this is a huge advantage, in terms of time saved, in terms of mitigating risk, right? Managing compliance, as well as getting exactly what you want from your HR suite of applications and your HR suite of processes. Okay, so that was my real world example. And now I want to turn it over to David again, and he has a few examples that he can talk to you about. David?
Great, and thanks, Shoeb. And thanks for taking, I think, the group through that. I know it was, for me, as I continue to look at, the automation and where it goes, it's exciting to see what you all were looking at as Shoeb was going through was Worksoft connected to what I like to refer to as the intelligent enterprise for talent and HR. And that's Accenture's pre-configured SuccessFactors solution. So we've already gone and connected Worksoft in, right? Pre-built the scripts that go to what we would define as leading practices. So it's even a further jumping off point as you look at implementations and how do you do them differently. One of the things, as I'll get into the 3 client examples and some more detail on it, is really challenge your thinking. I think the tools that we have available today, are vastly different than what we had a number of years ago. And the ability to look at how we automate things and what parts of the solution we can go automate are now possible that we never dreamed of a handful of years ago. As you saw, right, the hire go in for the US or Canada, one of the pieces that, I've challenged our teams internally is, now that we've got stuff automated, how can I go make that process easier of getting the data entry? We've even automated, that piece of being able to take that data and get it into the automated piece. So I've got a very quick process of being able to do all of it and look at it together. So if we look at a couple of examples, so client 1, this is a European client, on SuccessFactors, and they were looking at they'd already implemented SuccessFactors, and we're looking at the different releases. So SuccessFactors now has moved to 2 releases versus the 4 previously, and they wanted to figure out how can we go fully automate all of the regression scenarios that we want to make sure that we see the upgrade that's gone in, we can go report out to leadership, everything is working as expected, and we're there. They've gotten to 100%, right? It's 45% faster, right, based on previous versions that they had used. It accelerated the project timeline by 35% in terms of what they were able to deliver for the client, of being able to go back and show them what automation brought to the table. The second client, global client, 80 plus countries in terms of population, a couple 100,000 employees. They've automated, right, 90 of their end-to-end, scenarios. They've done this for every country to be able to do it and understand, what the changes are, and be able to have that confidence that everything is working, because it's a 24/7 operation. They've got people around to make sure that everything is working as appropriate. So they've reduced the overall testing timeline by over 75%, right, just from this year, right? If we look at the regression testing from the release that SuccessFactors just had. And then when I talk about challenging ourselves to think differently, this is the third client. And this client used automation during the iterations. So we're all used to, right, 3 iterations for SuccessFactors, right, the more agile approach. How do we go handle it and do it? But they obviously did all of that. But the challenge that we thought about ourselves and with the client was, well, how can we use automation to go improve and speed up the different cycles? And yes, configuration changes, and I'll let Shoeb answer a question, shortly around, well, if configuration changes, how hard is it to update the automation scripts? But that project saw a 30% reduction, right, in time just by looking at that. And right, and record once, right, and use multiple times, right, from a team member to people across the globe to be able to do it. And these are just 3 powerful examples of where automation can be used. And just from a testing side, right, we haven't even touched on some of the other cases where we talk about production and using it to maybe drive processes that you have. So Shoeb, if you got one more. So this is a test of everyone's ability to regraph. But what we're trying to show here is over the quarterly releases, right? You can see that we've got a couple on there, and then you get into the first half, right? The manual testing and the automated testing and what happened. So if we look at Q4 of 2018, there was none. You get all the way now to the first release of this year from SuccessFactors, they're at 94%. And this is focused specifically right on Employee Central with 80 plus countries, but 376 automated test cases that they have running to be able to do things in a differentiated manner. And if we go one more, and this is where I think it's really important, and this brings it a little bit more to life. If we go one more down, I think shows you, right, not only the percentages that are there, right, as we talked about the Q4 all the way to the first half of this year, but if I go to the bottom right, so over a 75% reduction in time. They're now at 5 days versus 4 weeks. From an FTE perspective, it's now 4 FTEs instead of 8, and they're able to focus on more value-added activities. And that's continuing to be challenged today. So if I look at it from an hours perspective, just to give everyone an idea, 1,500 hours to 180. That is a massive shift of focus and time for resources, right, as you look at where they are in the first half of 2020. And that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, do the resources go away, right, as you talk about automation and all the stuff of, what happens to jobs. It's not that at all. It's what are other activities that folks can go do, Are there complicated scenarios that need to be looked at? How do we go think of things that we haven't done before? So it's not a, hey, I'm replacing someone because of automation. I'm able to go make them more effective in terms of the work that they're doing and the job they're able to perform. And this client will continue to push forward of looking at that automation and the journey that they're on, how they can continue to drop down, right, from 4 weeks to 5. You know, how can I get that to a day or 2? My team's going to love when I go give them the next challenge, you know, on that. But I think it's a real differentiator. It allows, right, the continuity of operations. It allows you to feel confident in terms of what the solution you have, and it's continuing to do exactly what you want. It allows you to look at identification and error resolution. Hey, if something didn't work, what was it? I don't have to go think about now, hey, do I need to go execute that hire or a certain scenario? But I can go look at the end. Did it work as I expected it to? And if not, I now have the ability to go see where it is and how it happens.